Kelly Harper tore the boarding pass as if it were nothing more than a piece of trash, the sharp crack slicing through the first-class cabin and shattering the stillness like a stone skipping across a quiet lake. Dozens of eyes snapped in their direction. Someone exhaled sharply. Someone else raised a camera. And in that moment, the first 12 seconds of a disaster, they had no idea they had just ignited. Ethan Morgan understood this was not a mistake, not a system glitch, not a procedural check. This was targeted. The imagined camera panned slowly downward. Seat 3A still held the imprint of him, his leather briefcase placed neatly, his headphones still draped across the seat, proof that he only wanted a peaceful flight. But peace was not for him, never for people like him. Kelly stood there, thin, pale chin lifted still, holding half of the torn boarding pass like a self-appointed judge. Her voice was sharp, brittle, laced with a poorly hidden thrill. "You do not belong in this section. Return to the back." The final words slid from her mouth, like knives, short, cold, intentional. Ethan looked straight into her eyes. No flinch, no wasted reaction, only a slight narrowing of his gaze, as if he were mentally storing the evidence. Just a few seconds, but the air felt like a cold wind sweeping across the cabin. He inhaled once long and steady the measured breath of someone stepping into a critical programming session where a single error could crash an entire system. His eyes darkened, not from fear but from the painful truth settling in she didn't see him as a passenger, not as a paying customer, not as a human being. She saw him as an error. The cabin stirred uneasily. A woman adjusted her coat, pretending to read her magazine while watching from the corner of her eye. A balding man whispered to his wife, "This again." A young guy raised his phone higher to get a better angle. No one intervened, but everyone knew what this was. And everyone knew it was wrong. Ethan slipped his hand into his jacket pocket. Slow controlled, no unnecessary movement. He took out his phone and opened the app. The QR code glowed, bright and unmistakable. Seat 3 of first class confirmed. He held it up to her, saying nothing, asking for nothing, refusing to lower himself. Kelly glanced at it quickly, as if she were only pretending to check, then shook her head fast. Decisive, determined to assert the tiny authority she believed elevated her. "Your app is malfunctioning," she said. "You belong in the last row. Maybe the system made a mistake, but I did not." Her final words were deliberately louder. She wanted everyone to hear. She wanted them to know that she alone decided who sat where, who belonged, where, who deserved what. Ethan remained silent, but something tightened inside him, cold and heavy like steel. Not because she insulted him, but because he had seen this hundreds of times in meetings, in hotels, at conferences, in life, in the eyes of strangers trying to decide whether he belonged in that space. And every time he swallowed it, stayed calm, tried to be the non-confrontational person of color, but today Kelly had pushed the final boundary. A tense silence stretched like a drawn string. Then Ethan lifted his gaze, cutting through her arrogance. "Return the ticket," he said, his voice low, steady, metallic. Kelly scoffed. "Did you not hear me? I said return it." He repeated, deeper, sharper, carrying the weight of years of being misjudged. The words sliced through the air like a blade. Kelly rolled her eyes, scrambling to reclaim dominance. "I will call security. You are refusing to cooperate. If you do not comply, you will be removed." The imagined camera zoomed in on Ethan's face. He did not move, but his eyes spoke clearly. Not today. Not him. Not another Kelly deciding his fate. He leaned back, slightly lifted his laptop from his bag, and set it on the tray table. A small gesture, but enough to signal he was not leaving. The cabin held its breath. Kelly hit the intercom. Her voice blasted through the space, sharp and exaggerated. Security to first class. Non-compliant passenger. Passenger appears suspicious. A few soft gasps rippled through the rows. The balding man frowned. The woman in the red jacket whispered, "Oh my God, seriously again." Ethan closed his eyes for 3 seconds. 3 precious seconds to stay in control, to not fall into the anger they expected from him. 3 seconds to summon strength from the deepest part of himself. When he opened his eyes, they were changed. No fear, no rage, only silent power. He straightened his collar as if preparing for a high-stakes presentation instead of a racial confrontation in the skies. His movements were slow, deliberate, confident enough to make Kelly hesitate for half a heartbeat. And that half-second told the cabin something was different. Ethan was not the type who got bullied into silence. He was not the type who caused chaos just to prove a point. He was the type who, if he stood up, would change the entire room. Security arrived, 2 officers, dark uniforms, firm expressions, though both looked slightly confused to see him seated calmly. "Sir, we need to verify your identity." Ethan handed over his wallet, no trembling, no panic, no sign of fear. The cabin was silent, except for the faint hum of the aircraft. They scanned his ID, checked the system, compared it with the boarding pass. Their expressions shifted from suspicion to confusion to annoyance to the realization that they had been dragged into nonsense. One officer spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "He is fully verified. There is no issue." Silence held the cabin for half a second before erupting into angry murmurs. A woman blurted, "We saw everything he did, nothing wrong." A man growled, "She needs to be investigated." Kelly froze. Her face flushed bright red. Her eyes sharpened, not from shame, but from humiliation and fury. She had expected security to take him away, not expose her. Ethan simply looked at her. No smirk, no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a look. And that look carried a clear message. You chose the wrong target. But what she did next was what would change her entire life and drag Ethan into the nightmare waiting just ahead. Kelly turned away, her lips trembling. Then she clenched her jaw, stomped into the galley, and as the sliding door closed behind her, no one heard what she whispered into the internal line, except Ethan. Her voice dropped low, raspy venom soaked. "Get his name. Send it to the ground crew. Make sure he does not get away." Ethan's eyes opened, pupils tightening. The story was not beginning, and he knew when someone like Kelly felt their power slipping, they would do anything to take it back. Even violence, even destroying someone's reputation, even ruining the life of an innocent man. Ethan leaned back in his seat, staring out the window. The sky darkened. Heavy clouds gathered like an omen. A storm was forming. Not in the air. On the ground, where Kelly had just sent her first command. And in that moment, that exact moment, none of them knew that the man they had just tried to break was someone capable of destroying the entire system. Kelly Harper returned to the aisle with quick, sharp, tightly wound steps, the thud of her heels on the carpet landing like warning beats. The warm yellow cabin light swept across her face, stretching her tense features into something resembling a mask ready to explode. Ethan Morgan remained seated back, straight hands resting on his thighs, his breath held tight like a cold, steady line. He did not bow his head, he did not apologize, he did not retreat. That silence alone made Kelly's anger burn with the acrid scent of melting wires. Mark Holland, the flight supervisor, followed behind her. His broad frame blocked part of the aisle, and his eyes avoided Ethan's, as if he knew something was wrong, but did not possess the courage to acknowledge it. Brett inhaled sharply as he powered on his tablet, his voice trying to stay calm, but trembling slightly at the end of each sentence. Kelly stood, pressed beside him, lips drawn, tight eyes, sharp as needles. Ethan reopened his app slowly and held up the bright digital ticket, every letter sharp and undeniable. The movement was unhurried, but carried unmistakable authority. Kelly glanced at the screen and dismissed it instantly. Brett frowned, cross-checking again. His screen showed Seat 3A, the correct name, the correct itinerary, everything aligned. Yet Kelly stepped forward, slicing through the truth as if she could shove it out of existence. "We are over capacity in this cabin. You must move to economy class." Her voice was loud, deliberately loud, an insult dressed in the costume of procedure. Ethan did not move. He did not shrug. He did not utter a single word that could be twisted into defiance. He simply leaned back slightly, his gaze locked on Kelly. That calmness shifted the air in the cabin. The woman in the red coat 2 rows back lowered her magazine, her eyes widening. The balding man across the aisle froze, mid-sip, his hand suspended over his glass. Mark inhaled deeply. He looked at his screen, then at Ethan, then at Kelly, and in that instant, the truth became undeniable. No mistake, no overbooking, no system issue, only naked prejudice draped in the thin fabric of regulations. Before Brett could speak, Kelly's elbow collided sharply with the service cart beside her. In a split second, the large coffee pot tipped a wave of scalding dark liquid, arcing through the air and crashing onto Ethan's thigh. Metal clanged, the woman in red gasped, several passengers sucked in sharp breaths, the sounds blending into a chaotic tangle. Ethan clenched his jaw. The burning heat bit through his pants, stabbing into his skin like 100 needles. But he did not jump up. He did not curse. He did not give her the one moment she craved, the moment he lost control, so she could shove his life into a pit. "Oh, I am sorry, it was an accident." Kelly's voice was shrill and fake, each word dropping like shards of broken glass. A woman shouted, "That was not an accident, I saw you push it." A man stood up completely. "This is assault, for heaven's sake. Record everything." Phones lifted. Screens glowed like a storm of small flash grenades. Ethan took a napkin and wiped the spill slow to the point of cruelty, deliberate in every motion. He did not look down. He looked directly at Kelly. In his eyes was a light. She could not endure the truth about herself, the truth that she had exposed her own nature before the entire cabin. Mark stepped forward, his voice loud and urgent. "Kelly, return to your position immediately." His gaze no longer avoided hers. Kelly's face flushed a deep red, her lashes fluttering rapidly like someone whose weakest spot had been struck. She swallowed hard and turned away in silent rage, her heels hitting the floor like thrown knives. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence hung heavy like lead. Only the faint rustle of plastic, a tense exhale, the soft creak of a seat, as the balding man leaned back with a slow shake of his head, as if asking how something like this could still be happening in this year. Ethan placed the napkin aside. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes did not. He had withstood the spilled coffee, the humiliation, the bait meant to trap him into losing control. But he knew from the way Kelly turned away from the anger packed tightly into her footsteps from Brett's unease that this battle was not over. A soft sound filtered out from the galley. Kelly's voice, low and distorted by restraint. "Get his name Send it to the ground crew, they know what to do. The cabin seemed to drop in temperature. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. A man 2 rows back lifted his head as if he had sensed something deeply wrong. But no one understood it the way Ethan did. No one else heard the venom twisted into those words. They did not want him to leave his seat. They wanted him removed from his normal life. He opened his eyes. The bitter smell of burned coffee clung to his pants, hot and accusing. No one could target the wrong man so severely without consequences. Kelly believed she had won the first round, but Ethan knew the truth. What she had done was not a shove, not a spill, not an insult. It was a declaration of war. And when someone believes they have the right to decide another person's worth, they will not stop at rearranging a seat. They will try to erase an existence. Mark Holland returned to the aisle with the tense look of someone who had just stepped out of an emergency meeting. He held the tablet tight against his chest, his footsteps heavy, his body tilted forward, as if bracing for another collision. Kelly Harper followed close behind, lips pressed into a hard line, her gaze dropping like a blade, searching for somewhere to cut. The air in first class shifted the moment they appeared, thickening as if a storm were forming right inside the cabin. Ethan Morgan remained still, back straight, his pants stained, with a dark coffee mark spreading like a wound that refused to clot. A faint burnt smell rose from the fabric, reminding him that the moment Kelly crossed the line had passed, yet was far from over. He did not look down. He did not wipe again. He refused to give them even a second to think that the spilled coffee had shaken him. Mark swallowed hard, then lifted the tablet toward Ethan. "We have an issue with the system. Your seat appears to have been reassigned." His voice tried to stay neutral, but Ethan could hear the fear of entanglement, the trembling not born of concern for him, but fear of Kelly, fear of the small but dangerous shadow of power she had just revealed. Ethan turned his wrist and raised his phone. The digital ticket glowed bright and flawless, every detail sharp and undeniable. He held it up calm to the point of discomfort. "This is my seat, and you know that." Mark glanced at the screen, and for a moment the truth surfaced clearly on his face. But before he could speak, Kelly stepped forward, her heels striking the floor with the force of a warning shot. "We are over capacity in this cabin. He cannot sit here." A woman behind them let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. Unbelievable. Kelly pretended not to hear. She stared at Ethan as if he were a corrupt line of code breaking her program. Ethan lowered his phone and laced his fingers together. It was a dangerous posture, not defensive, but preparatory. His eyes locked on Kelly, unblinking. The silence was so taut that Mark instinctively stepped back half a pace. Mark exhaled, reopened the data, and there it was. Ethan's name displayed clearly, seat 3A highlighted in deep blue, confirmed. No reassignments, no system issues, no legitimate reason to remove him. Kelly stepped in, reaching for the tablet, but Mark shifted slightly to the side. A small movement, but one that said everything. He no longer wanted to be her tool. Kelly switched tactics. Her voice rose sharply coated in a thin layer of pretense, so fragile it was almost transparent. "You are disrupting our service. If you do not cooperate, I will call the captain." The sentence fell on Ethan like a verdict. The balding man muttered, "She is the one disrupting everything." Several passengers nodded. Kelly kept staring at Ethan. She wanted him to give in, to stand up, to ask permission, to appease, to shrink. Any one of those would give her the excuse she needed to label him a troublesome passenger. But Ethan denied her. "I am not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and sharp like metal striking stone. "This seat belongs to me. Your data says it. My data says it. And federal aviation law says it." Mark blinked, startled. Ethan did not raise his voice or threaten anyone, yet every syllable drew a distinct line between justice and abuse of power. Kelly laughed, a short, stiff, empty sound, like someone trying to break the tension, but only making it more frightening. She turned sharply and gestured for Mark to follow. The cabin watched. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. 1 minute passed, then 2. A loud thud came from the galley. Mark's voice low and urgent. Kelly's reply sharp and clipped. A fight was erupting behind the closed door. Ethan stayed completely still. But he listened. Every syllable, every abrupt breath, every pause. He heard the stubbornness in Kelly's voice, the unease in Mark's. He heard what no one wanted to admit. They were trying to create a reason to pull him out of the cabin. The door burst open. Kelly stormed out first. Mark followed his face, pale. Kelly pointed at Ethan. "You must leave your seat immediately. This is a direct order from the captain." Ethan looked at Mark, not at Kelly, only at Mark. Mark swallowed, then gave a small shake of the head. There was no order, no directive. He knew Kelly was lying, and Ethan had seen it. Kelly clenched her teeth. She stepped forward, leaning close to Ethan's face, close enough for him to see the pure hostility no longer concealed. "You belong in the back." Ethan remained still, eyes unchanged, his voice dropping low, like the deep crack of earth before a volcano erupts. "Do not say something you know is false." Kelly flinched. Just half a second, but enough to show she had lost control. She stepped back, an instinctive retreat from someone she had mistaken for prey. But this prey didn't run, did not fold, did not fear her. A small metallic click echoed when Mark dropped his pen. The cabin fell into a thick, heavy silence. Kelly looked around and saw the shift. Passengers no longer looked at her with compliance, no longer believed her, no longer feared her. She needed to reclaim power immediately. She spun toward the intercom, pressing the button so hard her knuckles turned white. Her voice rang through the cabin, loud and piercing. "This is Flight Attendant Harper. I need security at first class immediately. We have a non-compliant passenger. Potential threat to flight safety." Passengers exhaled angrily in unison. Ethan tilted his head slightly, a tiny movement, soft, but enough to show he saw every piece of her game. Kelly released the intercom button, her breath rising in her chest like smoldering fire. She stepped past Ethan, leaning close to his ear, her voice low and icy, dripping like a curse. "I will make sure you regret sitting in that seat." Ethan did not reply. He did not need to, because he understood this: when someone like Kelly feels even a hint of lost power, they transform into a storm capable of destroying an entire life. And that storm was approaching, slow but certain, like the engines humming louder, as the aircraft prepared for a journey none of them could imagine. A journey Kelly believed she controlled. But Ethan would make her understand the truth. It was only a matter of time. 2 security officers appeared at the front of the cabin, like 2 blades drawn from their sheaths, the overhead lights gleaming off their badges, sharp and cold. The entire cabin froze. A few phones lifted higher lenses, fixed on Ethan, as if everyone sensed that what was about to happen would become evidence of something far bigger. Kelly stood close to the officers, exhaling, as though she had just won a small battle. Her chin lifted slightly, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes cutting toward Ethan like a hunter who had finally cornered her prey. She said nothing because she believed she no longer needed to. She thought security would finish the job for her. Ethan sat upright, hands resting calmly on his thighs, not a tremor in sight. His gaze shifted from Kelly to the officers with a calm so steady that one of them hesitated for half a second before speaking. "Identification, please." Ethan reached for his wallet, the motion clear and deliberate, offering no resistance. No excuse, no vulnerability for them to twist. His ID landed in the officer's hand with the weight of an unbendable truth. The other officer lifted a scanner. A small beep sounded, followed by the soft swiping of a screen. He checked the ID, then Ethan, then the digital ticket. He matched each detail, every number, every name, every character. The cabin was silent as stone. Kelly leaned in, slightly waiting, hoping. She wanted even the slightest hint of doubt on the officer's face. She wanted validation for her narrative. But the moment she waited for never came. The officer closed the scanner and returned Ethan's ID. His voice carried across the cabin, clear enough that Kelly could not pretend she had not heard it. "There is no issue with this passenger. Ticket verified. Identity verified. Seat assignment verified." A woman behind them exclaimed, "I told you he did nothing." The second officer turned toward Kelly, irritation obvious in his eyes. His voice clipped sharply. "Next time check before calling us." The words hit harder than any slap. Kelly's face flushed, her lips trembled slightly, humiliation creeping through her like ice water. But instead of retreating, she spun around quickly, burying her fury in the loud, angry footsteps of her heels hitting the floor. A man whispered to his wife, "She's completely unhinged." The officers exited. The cabin settled into a heavy silence. Not peaceful, but the dense, suffocating kind that follows an explosion, like settling ash. Ethan inhaled slowly. Not in relief. Not with satisfaction. Just enough to reset the straight line in his chest, reclaiming his center after the first attack. But even in that steadying breath, he sensed something thin but taut in the air, like a thread being pulled tight. A presence appeared beside his seat, the woman in the red coat. Her voice was soft but sharp as glass. "You handled that perfectly. Do not let them get under your skin." We all saw what happened. Ethan gave her a small nod. She returned to her seat, but her words lingered like a small shield against the spreading darkness. The cabin fell quiet again. Ethan closed his eyes for a few seconds, and then he heard it faint, barely audible, the sound only someone who was waiting would catch, whispering from the galley. "Kelly," her voice stripped of professionalism, her tone dripping with venom. "I want his name. I want ground crew to handle him when we land. This is not over. I will make sure he does not walk out of that airport without paying for this." A cold space opened in Ethan's chest. Not fear, not shock, but a razor-sharp understanding. She did not just want to win a seat dispute. She wanted to destroy him. Ethan opened his eyes. The cabin seemed to tighten around him, the air wrapping itself around his spine. He knew what was coming would go far beyond an in-flight confrontation. His heartbeat slowed steady and controlled the rhythm of someone stepping into a fight their opponent didn't know they had already lost. A balding man leaned toward his wife, whispering, "She's planning something else. I do not like this at all." Ethan turned slightly, though he said nothing. His eyes signaled one thing he had seen, he had heard, he understood everything. Kelly re-entered the cabin. Her face was unnervingly calm, her hands gripping the clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mouth curled into a thin metallic smile. "Stay in your seat," she murmured. "It will not be for long." She strode toward the front and disappeared behind the door again, but the stench of her threat lingered like smouldering smoke. Ethan looked down at his hands. The coffee stain had cooled, but the burn still pulsed faintly, a reminder of the first warning shot. A system had awakened, not because he did something wrong, but because he dared to sit in the seat that belonged to him. He inhaled deeply, lifted his cup, and took a small sip of water. Somewhere beneath the aircraft, the people waiting for Kelly's signal had already begun preparing, and from this moment forward, every step he took from the aisle to the jet bridge to the terminal doors would no longer be safe. No one in the cabin realized it, except him. A faint tremor ran along the body of the aircraft like an early warning. No one noticed, but Ethan felt it clearly. A quiet tension, subtle but precise, like the ground preparing to crack, like a system quietly scheduling its next strike. He sat still, eyes forward, but every sense sharpened. The smallest sounds became distinct, the soft clink of trays, the click of a seatbelt being fastened, the thin whisper of someone 2 rows behind. All of it blended into a low, restless hum waiting for a spark. The galley door burst open. Kelly Harper stepped out again. This time there was no polite act remaining. She looked like someone who had just decided to push her final piece across the board in a game she believed she had already won. Her hand gripped Mark Holland's shoulder, forcing him forward. Mark stared at the floor, moving reluctantly, as if being dragged into a wrongdoing he never chose. "We need to speak with you," Mark said. But the words were stiff, lacking weight, lacking truth, lacking... Kelly did not let him continue. "This seat is no longer yours. There has been a system update." She emphasized each word, trying to manufacture inevitability for something that did not exist. Ethan did not rise. He did not turn. He simply rotated his wrist and raised his phone, not to clarify this time, but to throw the truth directly at them. Seat 3A. Name Ethan Morgan. Confirmed status. Everything clear, bright, impossible to dispute. Mark swallowed. Kelly bit her lip. The entire cabin watched, as if a spotlight had just peeled the lies layer by layer. Non-compliant. Overcapacity. You must leave. Kelly switched tactics instantly, her voice changing, as if repeating the lie enough times would make it real. Ethan looked at Mark, no longer sparing Kelly a glance. "Mark, you know exactly what is happening here." Mark's face tightened. A second passed and he turned away. Defeated. Kelly stepped closer, raising her voice. "If you do not stand right now, you are violating security." "I will!" A loud metallic crash erupted. The entire cabin jolted. Kelly, completely unraveling, had yanked the service cart too hard. A metal cup clattered across the floor. Liquid splashed in every direction. Several passengers gasped. The moment was so raw that no one could pretend anymore. She had lost control. Kelly froze, cheeks burning, red eyes flashing with the frantic rage of someone whose true face had just been revealed. She turned on Ethan, ready to accuse, ready to twist reality into ammunition. "See what you caused. You are disrupting everything. You are creating chaos." Ethan raised his chin, his voice steady and cold, like metal being driven into stone. "I did not touch anything. You dropped it. You created the chaos. You need to stop." The cabin erupted. A man shouted. "That is enough," a woman added. "We all saw it. She is making things up." Kelly looked around. To her, the outrage was not a warning. It was fuel. She did not want to win fairly. She wanted to win at any cost. "I am reporting this passenger immediately." Kelly slammed the intercom button, her voice trembling, but trying to sound authoritative. "This is Harper. I need security ready when we land. We have a severely disruptive passenger. Repeat, severe." The air in the cabin collapsed inward, as if the oxygen had been drained. Ethan stayed still. But he knew that moment was the breach. No longer about a seat. No longer a minor altercation. No longer personal. This was a message, a command, a decision that would have real consequences the moment the plane touched the ground. Kelly stood in front of Ethan, her eyes narrowing, her voice dropping sickly sweet and venomous. "You think you won because security sided with you earlier. They are not saving you next time. The ground is my territory." Ethan stared at her, his gaze unwavering, unafraid, but holding something Kelly had never seen from him before the complete recognition of her true nature. "You're playing a dangerous game." Kelly laughed, a small, shaky sound soaked in hatred. "Danger is whatever I decide it is." "Not you." Mark stepped back, unwilling to intervene anymore. Passengers exchanged looks, as if watching a slow fire creep toward a fuel tank. Ethan placed his hand on the armrest, tightening his grip slightly. His pulse slowed. Not from fear, but because he understood her words were not threats. They were plans. They were intentions. They were the thing waiting for him on the other side of the runway. And Kelly, with red-rimmed eyes and a thin smile sharp as a blade, had no intention of letting him leave Seattle quietly. A flash of lightning streaked across the window, ripping through the grey sky. No one else noticed, but Ethan saw the reflection in the glass. He knew what was coming. The real storm was not in the sky. It was waiting for him on the ground. The plane began its descent with a deep, steady vibration, but the tension in the cabin did not come from the engines. It came from another sound, more subtle, more poisonous, the sound of Kelly whispering in the galley. Ethan heard every word, every pause, every breath, a quiet melody of retaliation. "Keep the comms open. When we land, I want airport security waiting, and give them the name, Ethan Morgan. Follow exactly what I tell you." Her voice scraped like metal claws on steel, intentionally low, but not low enough for him to miss it. A declaration of power crafted to make him understand that the fight was no longer inside this cabin. It was waiting for him the moment the aircraft door opened. Kelly stepped out again, her face unnervingly smooth, as if she had washed away her rage and replaced it with a mask of professional calm. Her expression no longer shook. It had become sharp, silent, and dangerous. She walked past Ethan like someone who had already outlined his fate in red ink and was simply waiting to sign it. Ethan remained motionless. His breathing didn't change, but behind that steady gaze, something darker was gathering speed. He had seen many forms of abuse of power, many kinds of people who tried to drag him down. But Kelly carried something different, a small-minded cruelty fortified by a uniform and a lifetime of believing she was always right. The aircraft hit the runway with a heavy jolt, the cabin shuddering like a giant room slammed into the earth. Kelly stood tall, blocking the aisle like a gatekeeper. "Only priority passengers may deplane first. Please remain seated." She was stalling not for the airline, but for those waiting for Ethan below. A passenger protested. "He is a priority passenger." We all saw what Kelly cut her off, her voice sharp as a blade. "Ma'am, sit down. This is a security matter." Ethan rose, not slowly, not hurriedly. Kelly spun around, eyes widening like an animal being forced out of its dominance. Sit down. That is an order. Ethan met her gaze, his voice low and precise, like a metal lock snapping shut. I do not obey an unlawful order. The cabin erupted again. Several passengers stood with him, a small shift but powerful. For the first time since the flight began, Kelly no longer held full control. She grabbed her radio, nearly shouting, "Bring security up immediately. Passenger 3. A is severely non-compliant." Ethan stood ready, not to fight but to avoid being torn away from the truth. When the aircraft door opened, cold air swept inside. Footsteps echoed on the jet bridge, heavy, deliberate. 2 airport security officers entered. Their expressions were completely different from the previous pair, harder, less patient, as if they had already been fed Kelly's distorted version of events and accepted it without question. "Are you Ethan Morgan?" One officer asked, his hand resting near his radio, making it clear the answer did not matter. Ethan raised his head. "Yes." Kelly shoved forward. He disrupted the entire flight. He threatened flight safety. "I want him removed immediately." Passengers shouted from behind. "That is not true. She is lying. We have video." The officers didn't turn. They didn't listen. They did not consider. They only looked at Ethan. "We need you to come with us. Now." The moment felt like a trap door opening beneath his feet. Ethan glanced around. The cabin was divided into 2 worlds, the people who believed what they saw, and a system shielding the uniform, even when the uniform was undeniably wrong. He knew he could not resist here. Not because of fear, but because he understood the structure better than anyone. He had seen it in technology, in corporations, in everyday life. A system controlled by the wrong person could crush the right person with nothing more than a fabricated notation. Ethan raised his hand slightly. Not high, not in surrender, simply to show he concealed nothing. Phones rose everywhere, recording every breath of the injustice. As he stepped out of the cabin, Kelly leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "I told you. On the ground, you do not stand a chance." And in that instant, Ethan realized the true danger was not her authority. It was her blind belief that the system would always protect her, even when she was wrong. But what Kelly didn't know, what the cabin had already sensed, was that Ethan was not like the others. He did not bow to systems. He found their vulnerabilities. He broke their code. He reversed their algorithms. And a rotten system like this was exactly the type of structure he dismantled best. Ethan said nothing. He did not look back. He stepped into the cold metal jet bridge where airport officers waited where the trap was set, where Kelly believed she had already won. But there was one thing Kelly Harper had never understood. You should never start a war with someone who can expose an entire system, and never, absolutely never pick the wrong person to fight. The airport interrogation room felt like a concrete box with no exit, the cold white light above reflected off the metal table, turning its surface into a strip of ice. Ethan sat there with his back straight, hands resting on the tabletop, the skin of his palm still marked by the burn from Kelly's thrown coffee. 2 officers stood across from him like rigid walls, not because they were powerful, but because they believed the false story someone had already fed into the system. One officer tapped his pen against a notebook, each tap sharp and impatient. The rhythm said everything. They were not here to find truth. They were here to confirm a script already written. "Do you know why you are here?" Ethan met his eyes, his voice low and steady. "Because someone lied. And because you believed that lie?" The second officer crossed his arms, suspicion tightening his face. "We received a report that you were disruptive, that you threatened flight safety, disobeyed instructions, and resisted a crew member. Ethan did not blink. That report is false, and you would know that if you watched the video. The two officers exchanged a glance, a quick, irritated flick of the eyes. They did not want to watch the video. They did not want to break the narrative. They wanted a confession to seal the paperwork. Provide your devices. We will check them. Ethan handed over his phone and wallet. No shaking, no hesitation. But in his eyes was something the officers did not yet recognize. Preparation, calculation, the quiet focus of someone who understood he was dealing with a system rather than two individuals. They sifted through his information. One officer opened the airline app and frowned as the data aligned perfectly. Valid ticket, correct seat, verified identity, nothing suspicious at all. But before the truth could fully settle on their faces, the door burst open. A woman strode in, brown hair tied back, eyes, sharp voice, crisp. She dropped a stack of documents onto the table without asking permission. "I am Sheila Grant, personnel for this company. I need you to watch this video immediately." The officers stiffened. Sheila unlocked her tablet and with one swipe played the footage. Clear, high-resolution images appeared Kelly throwing hot coffee directly onto Ethan's leg, passengers shouting, defending him, no aggression from him, no threat, no resistance. The room fell silent, frozen. One officer blinked, his voice dropping. "We were not informed of this." Ethan watched them. No anger, no shouting, but his eyes exposed one truth: they had been ready to believe the worst of him because it was easier than believing the truth. Sheila closed the tablet. "The report you received is fabricated. We are sending all evidence to your superiors. And if you detain him for even one more minute, the airline will be answering for wrongful detainment." One officer stepped back. The other flipped through his notes, confusion taking over. "You are free to go. Apologies for the misunderstanding." "Not a misunderstanding," Ethan said. "A deliberate act from one individual." Sheila placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Let's go." They walked toward the door. Ethan did not rush, but each step carried the weight of truth restored. He had not won because of luck. He won because truth was on his side, and because he refused to let anger become the weapon used against him. As the door opened, cold air swept into the suffocating concrete room. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, he stopped. Kelly was standing at the far end of the corridor, leaning against the wall, her eyes red not from regret, but from hatred. From watching him walk out without handcuffs, from seeing her first plan, forcing him from his seat, the spilled coffee, the security call all collapse in front of her. She did not look at Sheila, nor at the officers. She looked only at Ethan, as if he had shattered her small world of unchecked authority. Ethan looked back. No challenge, no contempt, just the cold fairness of someone who saw her for exactly who she was. Kelly pushed off the wall and took one step toward them. Her voice came out hoarse and sharp, like metal scraping stone. "You think you are free now?" Ethan did not answer. Sheila tugged gently at his arm, but his eyes never left Kelly. She gave a crooked, twisted little laugh, filled with something more dangerous than anything she had done on the plane. "We are just getting started." Ethan turned and walked, but her words followed him, like a shadow clinging to his skin, to his breath. And he knew she was not bluffing. The battle had fallen off the plane, down into a territory where she had allies, down onto the ground where systems could be bent by those who knew how to abuse them. And when such a system targets the wrong person, it creates a fire it cannot contain. Ethan kept walking, but behind him, the echo of Kelly's footsteps pounded in his mind like the rhythm of an enemy who had chosen a path with no return. A hunt had begun. The exit of the airport opened like a massive mouth, swallowing the man who had just walked out of the interrogation room. Cold, damp air rushed in, carrying the echo of announcements and the movement of crowds swirling like a whirlpool. Ethan walked through it, his shoes striking the glossy tiles each step, carrying the weight of a battle that was far from over. Freedom didn't feel light. It felt like being pushed onto a larger stage, a place where the lights shone directly on him, while shadows stretched out in every direction. Sheila walked beside him, her hand clutching the stack of documents tightly, as if shielding him from the residue of the lies hurled at him. "We need to get your luggage and leave immediately," Sheila whispered, though her eyes scanned the surroundings with quick, sharp movements, already searching for what felt wrong. Ethan gave a slight nod. He said nothing. His mind held no scattered thoughts, now, only a single point of focus. Kelly had tried to break him on the plane. She had dragged security into it, and she had just declared that this was only the beginning. Someone like Kelly did not make threats for sport. She made them when she believed the system stood behind her. The baggage hall clattered with rolling wheels and metal rails colliding. The line of passengers moved slowly like a giant serpent under the white, fluorescent lights. Ethan scanned the area, his instincts rising around him like an invisible armor. As he stepped off the final escalator, a strange movement appeared in the corner of his vision. 2 different airport officers emerged from behind a pillar. They moved fast, too fast, as if they had been waiting in position, eyes locked on him, even before they approached. Ethan stopped. Sheila moved closer to him, her hand drifting toward her coat pocket, ready to present evidence again, if needed. "Are you Ethan Morgan?" the first officer asked, his voice weighted with an order from someone higher up the chain. Sheila stepped forward, her tone cold as steel. He was released because there was no wrongdoing. "You already saw. We received another report," the second officer interrupted, sharper, heavier, more serious. "We are required to inspect his luggage." Ethan looked down at his suitcase. A simple black case. Something that could not create trouble on its own, unless someone wanted it to. "Who filed that report?" Sheila asked, her voice low and razor-edged. "We are not authorized to disclose that." Ethan stared at the officer, but what he saw was more alarming than the secrecy. They believed the report. Fully. As if it came from someone they trusted, respected, someone they considered a reliable source. "I will open the suitcase," Ethan said quietly. No fear, no hesitation, only truth. He set the suitcase down. His hands unlocked the latches. When the lid lifted, he saw it immediately. His belongings were slightly disturbed, not arranged the way he had packed them at the hotel. Shirts slightly off-fold, laptop shifted. A small detail, but for someone who had been targeted, small details were the first warnings. The officer knelt and began removing items. Sheila recorded everything. Ethan stood perfectly still, as if anchoring the truth with the steadiness of his body alone. Then the officer reached the bottom of the suitcase. His hand touched something solid. His eyes widened. He reached in and pulled out a small foil-wrapped object. Ethan saw it at the same moment Sheila did, and both of them froze. A small white powder packet. Dense. Tight. Not his. Impossible to be his. But exactly the type of thing someone would plant if their goal was to destroy his life. The officer hardened his expression. "So we need you to..." "No, Sheila," shouted, stepping forward. "I need to review the video footage now." The officer did not stop. He stepped toward Ethan, ready to cuff him. Ethan raised his hand slightly, not resisting, not surrendering, but looking at Sheila. His eyes held no fear, only a painful, cold realization. Kelly had not acted alone. She never would. Someone helped her. Someone had access to the luggage. Someone had a channel to send reports down to ground level. And someone believed her without question. Sheila sprinted to the nearest baggage desk. "Pull the camera footage for baggage processing for Flight 214. Right now. Open it now." Ethan had been led a few steps when Sheila's voice cut through the noise. "Wait, I have proof." The officers turned as the screen came into view. The camera footage was clear. 2 ground crew members opening Ethan's suitcase. One reaching into his jacket pocket, the other turning to block the view, a hand slipping inside. A small, precise movement. The white powder packet dropped into place. The officers stared at the footage. Clear. Undeniable. One officer loosened his grip. The other lowered the handcuffs. "It is not his," Sheila said, her voice trembling with fury. "This is a setup. This is a crime." The officer swallowed. "I apologize, Mr. Morgan." Ethan cut in gently. "You are doing your job, but someone is using you." The officers backed away. Sheila stood beside him, breathing hard, but her eyes blazing with sharp indignation. Ethan pulled his suitcase closer. He looked toward the sea of passengers bustling around the baggage area. But among the crowd, he saw one figure, Kelly, standing between 2 pillars, her lips curled into a small, satisfied smile, as if savoring each step of a plan she thought was flawless. Ethan did not look away. The storm had not come from fists, not from insults, not from the incident on the plane. The storm was being programmed, step by step, layer by layer, trap by trap. And Kelly believed he was just a user whose account could be locked without protest. But she did not know he was a code breaker. And the system she relied on had far more vulnerabilities than she realized. Ethan tightened his grip on the suitcase, his eyes never leaving Kelly. She had crossed the final line, and he was ready to enter the fight she could never imagine. Ethan left the baggage area with Sheila beside him, but every step felt like walking on ground that was beginning to crack. The attack had not stopped at the airport. It had only changed form, changed shape, leveled up. And he could feel it running up his spine, sharp as a needle. The hallway to the pickup zone stretched out like a pressure-filled tunnel. Neon lights flickered overhead. The sound of rolling luggage echoed louder than it should, as if the entire space was amplifying each step he took to warn him that every movement was being watched. Sheila walked beside him, tapping her phone non-stop, sending emails, taking notes, requesting audits. She was trying to build a legal wall around him. But Ethan knew that wall could collapse quickly if someone inside the system was still digging at its foundation. "We need to get out of here immediately," Sheila said, her voice low and compressed. "I will request a private car from the company." Ethan nodded. But before they reached the front entrance, Sheila's phone began vibrating rapidly, lighting up again and again, notifications firing non-stop. She stopped walking, frowned, then opened the newest alert. Her face turned icy. "You need to see this," she said. She held the screen in front of him. On it was an internal company email sent to the entire HR department, tagged with a red label across the top. "Urgent report on the dangerous behavior of Ethan Morgan." The sender, Ethan Morgan. The timestamp 3 minutes ago. The body fabricated poisonous lines accusing him of losing control, threatening people, and disrupting the flight. The hallway seemed to shrink around him. Ethan read each sentence as if watching a knife being driven into his back. Not because of the words, but because of the speed. The system had been bent again while he was still inside the airport. Sheila shook her head. This is not your email. The signature is forged. The header is altered. Someone is using unauthorized access. Ethan nodded slightly, but his eyes no longer showed reaction. They shifted into calculation. Sheila made a call. Her voice was controlled, but cracked at the edges. I need Ethan's account locked immediately, and trace the IP that sent the message. She listened. Then her hand tightened around the phone. They said the IP matches the airline's internal network. Ethan showed no surprise. He had already predicted it. Kelly was not acting alone. She had someone inside the system, someone with authority, someone with access, someone protecting her or working with her. Luggage internal emails, security alerts, all connected through one line, and that line was tightening around his life. Sheila gripped his arm. This is not an incident anymore. This is a coordinated attack. You need to be careful. Ethan looked toward the massive glass doors where the parking area glowed under Seattle's yellow nightlights. Outside, everything looked normal, but inside, his world was being twisted by invisible hands. Let's go, Ethan said. They moved quickly toward the exit. Night air washed over them, cold and damp. Taxis lined the curb. People rushed past. A distant horn sounded. But through the noise, Ethan heard something unusual. An engine revving louder than it should be. Rough, aggressive. Ethan turned left. A silver pickup truck sat in a no-parking zone, headlights off, engine rumbling. The driver leaned low in the seat, trying to stay out of the camera's view. Sheila's breath caught. Ethan, that truck. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder and pulled her behind him. His voice dropped sharp and precise. Walk to the other side. Do not look back. Sheila turned, but her reflection in the glass showed her fear. Ethan stepped slowly to the right, each step heavy like crossing thin ice. The truck's engine roared louder. Its headlights snapped on without warning. Tires screeched against the pavement. Ethan slowed his pace. Then, in the next instant, the truck lunged toward the exit, like a starving animal striking its prey. Sheila screamed Ethan. He spun, grabbed her, and pulled her into the gap beside a concrete pillar. The truck tore past the spot where they had stood only a second earlier, close enough that the blast of wind slapped his face. It did not stop. It did not slow. It swerved hard into traffic and vanished like a piece of malicious code, running a hidden command, then terminating itself. Sheila gasped for breath, her hands trembling. Ethan remained still, but his heartbeat hammered each thump, a warning that the core system was under direct attack. She backed up a step, her voice cracked and shaking. They are trying to kill you. Ethan said nothing. He stared toward the direction the truck had disappeared. There was no fear in his eyes, no panic, only a cold truth rising inside him. They no longer wanted to destroy his reputation. They wanted to erase him entirely. Ethan picked up his suitcase. His voice came out, quiet, sharp as a blade. All right, if they had chosen war, then he would dismantle the entire system that allowed them to do this. Ethan left the baggage hall with Sheila, but every step felt like stepping on a ground that was beginning to quake. The attack had not stopped at the airport. It had only changed shape, shifted skin, climbed a new level, and he could feel it running up his spine, sharp as a needle. The corridor leading to the pickup zone stretched long like a pressurized tunnel. Neon lights flickered overhead. The sound of his suitcase wheels rolling across the floor echoed louder than usual, as if the space itself was amplifying each movement to warn him that nothing he did was going unnoticed. Sheila walked beside him, pressing her phone non-stop, sending emails, drafting notes, requesting audits. She was trying to build a legal fortress around him. But Ethan knew that fortress could collapse quickly if someone inside the system was still hammering at its foundation. "We need to leave here immediately," Sheila said, her voice low and tight. "I will get the company to book another hotel under my name. We cannot use your card anymore." Ethan nodded. The taxi turned onto the highway, the car vibrating gently as the cold ocean wind pressed against the frame. Seattle's night draped itself in a thin mist, blurring the city lights like a memory being edited. Ethan rested his suitcase on his knees, his fingers tapping the handle lightly. Not out of worry, but analysis. This had gone far beyond a conflict between passenger and flight attendant. It had gone further than a personal dispute. A group had selected him as their target. They had access to ground crew, someone inside the airline's internal network, someone who could manipulate cameras, someone who knew his movements. And they were protected by the thing Ethan despised most: blind confidence in their own power. The taxi stopped in front of a small hotel on a quiet corner. Ethan and Sheila stepped out. Ocean wind whipped across the street, making the flag near the hotel entrance snap against its pole like a warning. Sheila opened the door and spoke to the receptionist quietly. Ethan stood behind her, scanning the street through the large glass window. A black SUV slowed down its headlights, shining directly into his face. Just for 3 seconds. Then it drove on. But those 3 seconds were enough for Ethan to understand. They were tracking where he went. Sheila pulled him into the elevator. 7th floor, corner room. The doors closed as soon as they stepped inside. The elevator rose. Sheila leaned against the metal wall, breathing unevenly. "They are ready to do anything to destroy you. Ethan, you have to be more careful. This is not about work anymore." Ethan turned to her, his voice low and sharp, every word forged like steel. "I knew that the moment they opened my suitcase." The elevator doors slid open. The hallway stretched, long and quiet, grey carpet, muffling sound so completely that every step echoed like a knock on a secret door. Sheila swiped the card and opened the room. It was small but clean. One bed, a window facing the street, a single yellow lamp casting a warm circle of light in the corner. Ethan went straight to the window. He lifted the curtain slightly. Street lights washed the pavement outside in orange shadows. A car was parked across the street. No lights. No movement. The person inside did not step out. Ethan watched for several seconds, then closed the curtain. They knew where he was. That was not surprising. What concerned him was how quickly they found him. Sheila sat on the edge of the bed, opened her laptop, her fingers trembling slightly, but her typing fast and precise. "I need to report this to the executive board. We cannot allow an airline to use its system to destroy employees from another company. This is illegal." Ethan looked at her, his eyes deep and cold. "Sheila, they are not doing this for the airline. They are doing this for Kelly." Sheila froze, horror settling across her face. "You think she has that much influence?" "Not her," Ethan said quietly. "The person behind her. Someone twisting the system. Someone with high-level access. Someone who understands how to alter data, how to manipulate the internal network, even how to make airport security react instantly without verifying anything." Sheila swallowed hard. Her voice dropped. Victor Ellis Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. The name filled the air like a puzzle piece that had finally fallen into place after being hidden for too long. Ethan sat at the small table, opened his laptop. Connected through a hotspot, not the hotel Wi-Fi. The blue glow of the screen lit the tension around his eyes. He began tracing the forged email. Header, routing, proxy, timestamp, source path. Everything matched the airline's internal system, but none of it matched any registered employee account. A hidden account. A high-level access key. A deliberately scrubbed trail. Ethan leaned closer. The code on the screen looked like the neural pathways of a creature scrambling to hide its tracks. Sheila stepped up beside him, staring at the screen. "What did you find?" Ethan nodded slightly, his voice so low and sharp it made the room feel colder. "I found their vulnerability." Sheila's eyes widened. "And what are you going to do with it?" Ethan closed the laptop. The click echoed through the room like a lock snapping shut. He stood up, his shadow stretching across the floor. He did not look like a man being hunted. He looked like someone who had just identified his target. "I am going to follow their trail, all the way." Sheila backed up half a step, fear and awe mixing in her eyes. "Ethan, you do not understand. This is not a small group. This could be an entire Ethan. Cut her off," his voice, deep and burning. "I know. And that is why I am not stopping." The door vibrated slightly. Not wind, not footsteps. A small tremor, but enough for Ethan to turn instantly. The truth settled over him. Whoever was after him was not just watching. They were close, much closer than he thought. From the perspective of a social justice expert, this story reveals a harsh yet undeniable truth. Injustice does not begin with a spilled cup of coffee, a fabricated accusation, or a falsified report. It begins the moment one person believes they have the authority to decide another person's worth. Ethan was not only confronting Kelly, he was confronting an entire system accustomed to hiding its failures behind authority and twisting truth through silence. Yet it was his calm strength, his evidence, and his unwavering resolve that forced that system to tremble. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe so we can continue uplifting the voices that deserve protection. And leave a comment with the phrase, "Stand strong," to affirm that you choose to stand on the side of justice.